Pakistan's challenges will depend to some extent on improving the country's education systems, which is going to be the subject of our event today, higher education and faculty development in Pakistan. The Wilson Center has been very fortunate to have had Sabiha Mansoor with us over the last few months. She's our current Pakistan scholar and the 6th Pakistan scholar the center has had over the years. The Wilson Center is very grateful to the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan, a Karachi-based charitable organization, for enabling us to have the Pakistan Scholar Competition and to host people of Sabiha's caliber. So I won't waste any more time. We'll get started. The format will be this. After I introduce Sabiha, she'll speak, and then we'll hear from our two very distinguished commentators. They'll provide some broader context for Sabiha's presentation, and then we'll go to a Q&A. So, as I said, Sabiha Mansoor is our current Wilson Center Pakistan scholar. She's doing research and writing a book on fashioning a professional development strategy for higher education faculty in Pakistan. She's professor and dean of the School of Education at Beacon House National University in Lahore. Previously, she was professor and head of the Center of English Language at Aga Khan University in Karachi. And before that, she taught at Kinnaird College in Lahore. She's written an immense amount of material, a number of books on education, higher education, and language instruction in Pakistan and more broadly in South Asia. So I now cede the floor to Sabiha.
Thank you, Michael. I'm really privileged to have such a distinguished audience, and I can spot many of my colleagues and friends, right here, important educationists, academics, and other stakeholders. My paper and the topic that you see right here in front of you, I think it tells a lot about what we're going to be discussing today. It's about empowering faculty, and I think that my paper will enlarge upon the issue that the misfortune of Pakistan's education system has been that all the policy making has been conducted by bureaucrats, by senior administrators, and not by the actual stakeholders, which are the faculty themselves. 2010, this year, we are completing a decade of higher education reforms in Pakistan. A lot of attention, a lot of funds have been invested in these reforms. From what we are hearing, this is apart from my study, is that these reforms have had very little visible impact on the teaching learning process and on the quality of the graduates. So I think that this study is pertinent in the respect that it will try and explore some of these issues and also try and suggest a strategy which is long-term and which links up faculty's aspirations with institutional objectives and the national education goals. Before we talk about the higher education system, I think it's extremely important, especially for some of our guests today who may not be knowing too much about the Pakistan's educational system. It's quite a bleak, quite a dismal picture, as you can see. In the 2004 UNDP report, we learn that Pakistan has the lowest index in terms of education and rights, basic human rights, after Africa. 50% of its population are not even literate. Most of them are women. And the primary and secondary education, as you can see, is highly problematic. We have the same outdated methodology. We have a very high dropout rate. And we have teachers who are not trained. One important thing, I think, right at the onset, which should be mentioned, is that Pakistan today has 1/3 of its population, that's 60 million young people, in a population of 180 million today who are between the ages of 17 and 23. Now, this is, I regard, and many other experts, as a window of opportunity. Because if this young population is made productive, is channelized, and can play a productive role in the employment sector, it can do wonders for Pakistan. So, as pointed out by Michael, I agree with him, and I think many of you will also agree, that perhaps education is the area we need to look into carefully to see whether, and I was just thinking of this line in the cap today, whether when winter is here, can spring be far behind? So in this winter of despair, when Pakistan is grappling with all its problems, we hope that this education revolution, I've suggested some recommendations. I'm sure other scholars will be working too and making other recommendations. And if the policymakers pay heed to some of these research findings and formulate the policy based on these results, I think we have some chances of success. The other thing I'd like to mention is that, keeping in view the vital role of education, the education sector reforms were set up by President Musharraf, the military dictator, in 2001, and a lot of aid has gone into those reforms. About $7.2 billion have been pledged in the next 15 years, so 10 years have elapsed, 5 years more. And the new education policy announced in September 2009 also supports these reforms. They have made a declaration saying we are going to pledge 7% of our GDP, which is normally for the social sector, to education from the 2.5 earlier on. Whether they keep the pledge is another matter, but at least the statement is there. And finally, to say, and this has to be seen in the context of my presentation, that the Vision 2030, which has been formulated some time ago with these ESR, education sector reforms, the goal of this national educational policy and the Vision 2030 is to produce graduates who are critical thinkers, problem solvers, and responsible citizens of Pakistan and the world. Now, that's a tall order, so let's see what we can do. Another, I think, important thing is to mention that when we talk about higher education, you need some kind of a profile. We're talking about 124 universities and degree awarding institutions in Pakistan. They're about almost, 60 to 40%, 60 public sector and 40% private sector universities. We have 1,210 degree colleges in 4 provinces of Pakistan. Now, the universities are managed by the Higher Education Commission. The degree colleges are regulated by the Higher Education Commission, but the administration as well as the funding comes from the provincial government. So this has created quite a bit of problem, and we'll look at it later. The faculty in universities is 46,893, degree colleges is 21,112. You can see the problem right here, which is that the student-teacher ratio is much higher in the degree colleges. And we'll see later how problematic the degree colleges teaching learning is as compared to the universities. The student enrollment we're talking about is almost 1 million. Now, what are these higher education reforms? When President Musharraf came into power in 2000, he brought about what is called the higher education reforms. And I think that due credit needs to be given to him and his cabinet, because for the first time, higher education was being given a lot of importance. Previously, in the decades before, it had been primary education and followed a little bit by secondary education. So a lot of funds were given to these reforms. They were set up on the recommendation of the task force and the steering committee. The Boston group also, presented a lot of recommendations and focused on the area of faculty development and how important it was that faculty be trained in modern pedagogy. Worth noting is the funding. The higher education budget increased from 15 million to 150 million right in the first year. That's 10 times. And the science and technology from 3 to 100 million. And this kept going upwards till the last couple of years when we were facing recession. In the international donors, and I believe there's a team here from the USAID as well, USAID has been the largest donor of these higher education reforms. It has invested something like $300 million in various reform actions. We have the United States Educational Fund supporting the Fulbright Scholarship Program for faculty, the Merit and Need-Based Scholarship Program for qualified needy students, and the pre-STEP $90 million project announced in 2009 for upgrading pre-service teachers. To talk about it in general terms, I think that, and we are all conscious of the fact that we are all constrained with time. So I'm going to limit this presentation to only the highlights. And then if there are any other, details you want to know, you can always ask later. But I think that it was a two-pronged strategy. It was access and quality. Now, in terms of access, I would like to give credit to the Higher Education Commission for having achieved its objective. And they were able to double the population of students enrolled in the universities and colleges in the period that they had indicated. That is from 2.6 to 5%. And later on, in 2015, the target is to take it up to 15%. The area of concern, and I think that this is the area where everybody is going to be focusing on, is the quality of our graduates. What is the quality of our teaching learning process? Has that improved? Are our graduates now employable, not only in Pakistan but worldwide? Do they have the skills that are required that the graduates need to have in being able to, not only work and find jobs, but also to be good citizens? So this is a question that we need to look at. What we do know is that the main focus of the higher education reforms was to drastically increase the number of PhDs. Now, please remember this, because this is the focal point, that all the money invested, because remember, one graduate or faculty that you send abroad costs you at least, as far as I think, my calculations are 5 million rupees. Now, that means they've sent 8,000 scholars, 4,000 roughly abroad and 4,000 in Pakistani universities. So that's 8,000 scholars that are being funded for PhDs. And their target was that in the first 5 years, they're going to be having 40% faculty who will have PhD degrees. And then, of course, there's faculty training, and we'll talk about that. There's been a lot done even by USAID in terms of the pre-step program, as I mentioned, and the National Academy for Higher Education and the Learning Innovation Division by HSC. These courses have been offered, but they're sporadic and one-off. Now let's look at these numbers, and I think they're mind-boggling. For a moment, I couldn't believe them. This table was, and I need to thank the Higher Education Commission, sent to me by the Executive Director only on 10th of February 2010 on my request. And I'm very grateful to him. They've cooperated with me throughout my study, given me the sampling frame for all the HSC scholars. But look at the results. You find that for the master's programs, for the PhD programs, the problem is acute. There are only 733 who returned so far from a total number of 7632. And this is in the year 2010. The project was launched in 2002. I think in all fairness, we need to look at the category which has completed 5 years of PhD studies, because otherwise there may be some. Of course, the impact cannot be completely measured at this time because a lot of scholars will be returning. But from the first 5 years, we calculated that from the first 5 years, the people who've already spent 5 years in their studies, only 10% scholars have completed as been reported. And overall, in different categories, is 12.5%. But again, major concern is the indigenous scholars. Our indigenous PhDs, 4%. You must have heard of friends and colleagues saying, oh, I enrolled in a PhD program in Pakistan. It's been 10 years, 9 years, 8 years. Haven't heard so far from my examiner. All right, so let's look at the outcomes of these reforms. You looked at it in terms of PhDs. Now let's look at it in terms of professional development. We find that the faculty completing the professional development courses, their target again was 100%. Now, they haven't achieved the 100% target. I think it's an impossible target. But it's worth mentioning here that the professional development courses carry no credits. There is no incentive attached to undertaking the professional development programs. So whereas the PhD degree gets you the professorship, and it gets you your promotions, and it's a route to career advancement. So that's, and the whole rat race, everybody's running for their PhD. We must get a PhD because that's the only track that we can follow. We find that professional development, which is such an important part of faculty development, there is no motivation, there are no increments attached to it, there's no support systems in terms of study leave, etc. Just to briefly mention, because I think my time up for this part is over, which is that teacher education institutions in Pakistan are mainly for primary school teachers, higher education, very few, hardly, and not of high quality except for the IED, which is also the Aga Khan University focusing on school teachers. The tenure tracks reward system, which was put in place right in 2002, means nobody can get a promotion, not even college teachers, to professorial ranks, including associate professor, if they do not have a PhD degree. And of course, we find that the evaluation of the Higher Education Commission supports this policy, which means that when they are going to be evaluating the institutions, or they're going to be evaluating the faculty within the higher education institutions to give them a certain grade, they give very little attention to faculty development for PD, for professional development. For PhD, of course, it's a high number. So just to sum up this first part, HSC has been able to enhance student enrollment. It's contributed towards promoting research. The digital library has played a great role, and so has its role been in upgrading physical infrastructure. Now, the research questions that came up with this brief review, which I presented to you, is that we really need to understand what do we mean by faculty development. What should be its objectives? How would it address different needs of higher education faculty? How would it impact the students? And what would be the drivers of success? Now, I've got this definition, and it's really from the American Federation of Teachers guidelines. It's interesting. I went through books and books, and my research intern Amna is sitting here. We went through months of looking at a suitable definition, and I think this made perfect sense to us. Professional development is a continuous process of individual and collective examination of practice. It should empower individual educators and communities of educators to make complex decisions, identify and solve problems, and connect theory, practice, and student outcomes. It should also enable teachers to offer students the learning opportunities that will prepare them to meet the world-class standards in given content areas and to successfully assume adult responsibilities for citizenship and work. Now, just to say in this that it's important that what it really focuses on is that the whole faculty development program should be faculty-centered. It should not be controlled by the administration, and it should be structured university-wide, and it should have a reward system. Now, these outcomes actually are very similar to Bock, who was your president of the Harvard University, and his book on undergraduate learning, underachieving colleges. And it really matches what we had put down ourselves, the ability to communicate, to engage in critical thinking, problem solving, moral reasoning, to prepare our graduates to be citizens of Pakistan and the world, and to live with diversity, considering how intolerant and rigid our educational system is turning our graduates into, and to be involved in a lot of interests and then get all the skills and content knowledge to be able to find good jobs. All right. Now, I hope I'm on time, Sajid. Okay. Now, this research framework, let's look at this. What did we do? This is now where my part starts. We actually put together a framework in which you were looking at the views of scholars. Now, scholars, I'd like you to understand the definition that Higher Education Commission uses. Scholars are not only students. Scholars is anyone who is funded by HSC for higher studies. They can be students, postgraduate students going further for PhD, and they can also be faculty. So scholars, faculty, and higher education administrators. And I would like to mention here that many of my experts and think tank, from universities in USA, Georgetown and American University, and so many others have contributed to this study, and I'm very grateful to them for their wonderful ideas. Well, what we did was we conducted an e-survey, which meant that we actually sent out an e-questionnaire to all the 7,600 scholars that the HSC had funded. And this sampling frame was provided to us by HSC. We also distributed a questionnaire amongst the educational institutions, universities, and colleges, where we did a case study on looking at what were the faculty development programs and practices in place today. And finally, we came to our findings. So let's first look at the case study. We have, and you can see very clearly, that universities' vice chancellors have reported that there is a program present in the university. 100% have reported that. But if you look at degree colleges, look at the problem there. Out of 15, only 3 colleges said, yes, we have a program. And interestingly, the number of the faculty who are new in the degree colleges, again, very little attendance by them if there was any FT program offered. And similarly, when it came to being involved in a consortium or evaluation, Again, it's universities and not colleges. Worth noting here, please, is the last line, faculty with PhDs. Currently, and this somehow we checked again with the numbers that are available for the total population, there is about 1/3 of faculty in the university, cadre, which have PhDs, but only 6.8 or almost 5% as in the national population of faculty for degree college teachers. That's a very small number. So again, I'm going to skip a little bit of this, but mainly the HEC grants funded the universities, the provincial government funded the degree colleges, and the focus was on higher studies. When they talked about faculty development, they said most of our money is going towards PhDs. Now, when you looked at the FD practices, we found that there was an acute need that they themselves put forward, that they needed guidance in developing the programs, availability of expertise, incentives of faculty, they needed HEC support. And interestingly, look at the last line again. Despite the high needs of degree colleges, only 23% of them, because of, they say, well, we think it's important, faculty development. And that's interesting, we've probed that, and I'll discuss it further. Now, this is the survey that went to the scholars, all of them, and you can see that we had a response of almost, we actually got a response out of those 2,000 bounced back, so we had about 5,000, which was strange because that was email addresses given to us by HSC, but we just couldn't deliver them. And then we got a 10%, over 10% population of scholars and faculty. So one of the main things that came forward was that in the indigenous programs, you can see that the difficulties are much more acute than with those who are studying abroad. And this is no surprise, but still we've got the numbers here. They feel that they're facing problems regarding non-availability of courses, getting appropriate supervisors, and very high number, talk about not being able to access resources. And of course, delay in results, which I mentioned earlier. Now, I think that this is also interesting. There was a question, these are all self-reports, which says, well, this is for the population that's almost completed their programs, or at the end of the program, that how do you think your higher studies program or the faculty development that you did have affected you or helped you in the following areas? And we find that, again, those who went abroad, they say, well, our personal development, whether it was enhancement in knowledge or improvement in pedagogical skills or engaging reflective practice or enhancement of research capacity, was much higher than their local counterparts. Needs, as you can see, is for everything. Now, this needs is a very important needs assessment table, because what I wanted to show all of you was that apart from specialized knowledge and research that is already being focused on, you can see there's a lot of need which is being expressed by faculty for pedagogy and for personal skills, which is media technology and communication skills and so on. And this, again, is a lot of interest, and I'm sure that AGC is going to take note of it. They've got a lot of things in place, like no exit and I don't know what not. But if faculty don't want to come back, they don't want to come back, or scholars. So you have, when you look at all MPhil PhD scholars, it's the Pakistani-based scholars, 50%, who are saying we want to go and settle abroad. And 25% are those who are already abroad. Now, that's a big number. Now, the reasons are different. For those who are working abroad, they talk about having much, better or stimulating work environment. But for the scholars who are being, engaged in higher studies in Pakistan, it's different. And what they're talking about is that there is a better future for our children. So there are two different reasons, and I think we can well understand, given the conditions of Pakistan today. Now, we don't have time to discuss qualitative data. Yeah, but we've come to the last part. So what do we do? Just to wrap up the findings, you can see that in terms of the survey on practices, there's very few colleges that said, yes, we have a program. Yes, we are engaging in some FD activities. Yes, we have some funding. Very few. I would say almost less than, 10% even. And even those who said we have a program, when it came to practices, they hardly engaged in any practices. And interestingly, one of the practices, and you'll all be very amused, that came out very high in all the cases was that we do a quarterly review of our teachers' performance. In other words, accountability was always coming before development. So even in colleges, the highest practice was, we evaluate our faculty. And that was the only thing that they talked about, evaluating the faculty. So the vision is 2030, corresponds to the other vision of 2030, that Pakistan's higher education faculty will be empowered as teachers, specialists, and researchers through holistic faculty development programs leading to qualitative improvements in student outcomes and transforming higher education. How do we do that? The mission statement says it will encompass all activities that will focus on faculty members, first as teachers engaged in student development, secondly as scholars and professionals, and thirdly for their personal development. And that support and services would be provided in all these areas through policy recommendations, implementation, and resources. Policy recommendations are very simple, and I can just talk about them. What I'm proposing is, and this has come as a recommendation from some of the people I've talked to, that we do not need a PhD for our degree college teachers, for undergraduate programs. What we need instead is a one-year MPhil program, which is a 3-strand program, a multidisciplinary program which puts together the content knowledge through advanced courses, the research capacity, which is action research primarily, and third but most important, the pedagogy. That would be the 1-year MPhil program that they would be required to do, and it could be modular, they could do it over a period of time. So then professional development courses form 9 credits out of the 30 credits, 32 credits. So you incorporate PD right into the faculty development program. Now, the other is that we're talking about alternative tracks where you can offer multidisciplinary programs. And the other important thing here is that what I'm suggesting is that for each faculty in higher education, there should be a portable faculty development credit portfolio, which should be maintained by the units that I'm going to be talking about now in next. And that incentives should be provided. There should be partnerships with public and private institutions, links with international universities, and I think very important, we need a research study, whether it's by PIDE or by some other organization in Pakistan, to look at how many PhDs do we need to produce, in what areas, arts, sciences, what skills, so that it matches. A PhD is an expensive affair. So when you're talking about PhDs, it should match the employment sector's needs with the graduates and the scholars who are doing their PhD. The implementation strategy is interesting. I don't know how you'll take it. I think it's a little out of the box, which is, what I'm proposing is that apart from HEC, which is the apex body, you have 4 provincial institutes for faculty development in higher education. These 4 institutes are really supporting mechanisms for the faculty development centers that should be established at a district or a local level. The Faculty Development Center should be a cluster of strong and weak higher education institutions based on the principle of cooperative learning. So let's say you have Government College Lahore, and I think many of you may be from Government College Lahore, Pakistanis who are based, sitting here. They could be the lead institution for the cluster there. So you could have a cluster of 4 to 6 higher education institutions. You have universities and colleges. The universities, as we've seen, are much emerging to be as more stronger institutions and colleges. And together, they, look at the programs that they're going to offer. And the other thing is that the faculty development program within the universities need to be now, really supported rather than externally from the HSC. So this indigenous or the local, it's almost like I thought like the Grameen Bank, where you have things happening at a very local community level. And you have, change coming from within and not from without, where faculty are responsible for their own growth and for their own development. And then faculty development programs are offered according to their needs and their interests rather than somebody telling you what to do. Funding resources, of course, we suggested both Planning Commission, federal government, provincial governments, and then the international partners. This is important. These recommendations are based on a democratic approach. It's based on the cooperative model. It's based on a model that looks at social reality, at our own socio-cultural environment. It looks at a decentralized system. It looks at an institution which can take responsibility for its own growth, so more institutional autonomy, supporting agencies developed by government to support the institutes and centers at the provincial and district level. Strengthen your indigenous PhD program. Remember, sustainability is only going to happen through that. How long is Pakistan going to take a begging bowl around to its international donors? I think this is a very important message that's coming across through this study, which is if we want that Pakistan's educational system should become strong, it needs to start focusing on its own programs. Sending scholars abroad is a quick fix. It's a crisis management approach, where all you say is, okay, so many $1 million coming in here, let's send 50 scholars for PhDs abroad. So many $1 million coming here, let's send another 80 abroad. But I think that a time will come when Pakistan will have to stand on its own feet and will have to look at a system where it can support its scholars and its faculty and its students and its population through its own local programs. So finally, and I think I may be on time, I don't see Michael sending me a little note, which is, it's coming soon, which is that this policy hopes to impact the youth. And I think that this is important. I mentioned that in, I think, Michael, in that handout that was circulated, that what are the implications of having the right policy in place? If you don't have a right policy in place, and if you look at our history of colleges and universities, there is a political side. And we know that not having the right policy means you have youth who are frustrated. They feel discriminated, like the public sector students versus the private sector, the Urdu medium versus the English medium. You have students who, despite their content knowledge, don't have personal skills like ability to communicate and cannot enter the white-collar jobs. So there's a lot of frustration that is brewing. And if we want that our graduates are productive, that our graduates contribute to Pakistan's economy, and that our graduates are tolerant and mature and make a productive and contribute as good citizens, I think it's important. Secondly, this also provides an opportunity to strengthen relationship of Pakistan academics with experts abroad through various initiatives. We are hoping that with some of the international partners present here today, if some interest is evoked and they see some meaning in these policies and they express an interest, we would be able to establish some links with partner universities in US in particular. And having said that, I'd like to mention my intern, Sajid, who's sitting here, who came to me a couple of days ago and said, Sabiha, I know that our concern is, will the US universities come to Pakistan? Will the academics come to Pakistan? Remember, there's a bill passed in the Indian Parliament which says that now US universities, especially the Ivy Leagues, are establishing not just centers, but university centers there to award their own degree. Why can't we do that in Pakistan? And I said to Sajid, they won't come. It's not safe. It's not secure at the moment. Plus, we have other concerns where we want to be independent. So I think that what he suggested and which I'm seeing happening is that you have a lot of learning happening through what is called the internet. There are two students in Sajid's class. One is in Brazil and the other is in California. The class is happening here in a university, Georgetown. Maryland. And in this university, you have a class going on where all the regular students are sitting there. And at the same time, you have two students outside, one internationally and one in another state, attending those classes. So help can come, assistance can come, exchange of ideas can come through many innovative measures. So some visits, but could be done in other ways. So I look forward to the question answers later. And before I complete my presentation, I'd like to acknowledge my thanks to the Woodrow Wilson Center. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here at the center for the last 7 months. They've been so supportive. I've got so many resources to work on. No excuse for me to say, oh, I didn't get enough time to put a good study together. I'd like to acknowledge the support of HSC, the Higher Education Commission, who has cooperated right from the highest rank to the lowest in all possible ways to make the study a success. I'd like to thank the Beacon House National University for giving me funds for the two surveys, especially the Institute of Public Policy. I'd like to thank all the subjects who are part of my study, the academics and the experts, my research interns, Sajid and Amna and Josh also was there in the first semester with me, And last but not least, a patient audience who has sat there and, listening to me. And I was just wondering and thinking this morning, how many people will come? Who's interested in education? And I find, well, there are quite a few, and all, really people that I really look forward to their contribution to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sabiha. That was that's a very good, interesting presentation. I want to give our two commentators an opportunity to respond, and they're educationists in their own right. We're first going to hear from Hamid Kizilbash, who is Principal Research Analyst at the American Institutes for Research. He's currently managing a project there on education sector reform in Pakistan. Prior to joining AIR, he was the project director of a program to establish a teacher training institution for teachers of primary grades in Lahore. He's been involved in several other projects like those. He's also taught at a variety of institutions, including in Pakistan and in the United States. And he's also authored a number of material on education in Pakistan.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Sabiha. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to take very long. And after this excellent presentation of Sabiha, I must say I'm absolutely thrilled at the future of higher education in Pakistan. I hope it meets all your expectations. Thank you also to the Woodrow Wilson Center for inviting me today. I don't like to go to too many events these days, primarily because I find I have nothing to say. But when Sabiha is going to talk about higher education, where I have spent my whole life, and the most important institution, Michael, to mention in my life is the University of Punjab, which is where I taught from 1966 until I retired in 1997. In 1947, Pakistan had one university, and the enrollment at the university was 644 students. This is the current Pakistan. I'm not including East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. Today, I'm told there are 124 universities, and the enrollment is somewhere around 1 million. So what are we complaining about? Why are we so unhappy? Why is everything so bad in Pakistan? I think I would like to argue that there's plenty wrong and we have lots of problems. But also, when you want access, we start working on access. The moment we start working on access, you come back from your PhD at Duke University and tell us your quality is no good. We start working on quality. We can't keep up with access. Then you say your access is. So what I think we have to face is that Pakistan is that part of the Indian subcontinent where there was no great tradition of education. We're good soldiers. We're good tradespeople. We welcome outsiders. They've been coming for centuries. Alexander came in BC. And we've entertained everybody. But the real issue is that when you start asking for results quickly in education, you're likely to get the kind of responses that you're getting. Each one of us does a study, and I'm very happy to report Sabiha, another colleague of yours, whom I will not name, whose chapter I reviewed recently, has done a chapter on higher education and what needs to be done. So I think what I want to get at is something along these lines, and that's from the point of view of background. I am a product of the professional development that Sabiha wants to do, because I spent my whole life in higher education, and I can't recall anybody ever saying to me, "Hi, I represent professional development of Punjab University, you're going to a professional development course," or "Now I'm sending you for a PhD." My father, God bless him, came up with some money to support my education in this country, and that was primarily the ticket to the United States. I got my degree, went home, worked there, and I discovered that professional development is partly the individual's commitment to his or her profession. And I think, Sabiha, as we look at all the things that you're proposing, and God knows they're excellent suggestions, my real question to us all will be, so who's going to man these higher education professional development institutes? So who's going to man X, Y, and Z that we want to do? Your real problem is, and I have a very short answer, and I mentioned it to Michael when he asked me, what are you going to talk about? My answer is, in Pakistan, almost steadily from the 1960s, when I started in higher education, the message is, your work is not important. You are not important. There are no resources to support your interest in professional development, in higher education, whatever. That was the message. I'm not saying it's today, because I think Sabiha is talking about Mr. Musharraf's days, and God knows I had nothing to do with those days. I was well out of higher education by then. But in the old days, the message was, as we began, remember 600 students at the only university in Pakistan in 1947, and that's India. That's the great University of Punjab. And there are only 600 students. So the growth is one aspect of education in Pakistan, and quality is another aspect. Each time you get into this growth business and don't have quality, young people who are going to have families say, why should my child do this? How many, and Sabiha and I can talk about this a little because we were somewhat privileged in our background in Pakistan, how many parents said to us, you know, sweetie, why don't you go into higher education? The army, civil service, God bless them, foreign service, you name it, and that was all great. But my parents were amazed when I said, I think I want to teach at the university. I mean, 90% of my colleagues, friends, all made fun of this decision. So we're coming from a background where higher education, even if it had done some quality work, and I would completely agree it hasn't performed, if it had done some quality work, and there are exceptions, and there's much more good stuff going on today compared to the 60s, I think the key to developing a strong professional development program at the universities in Pakistan is for first Pakistan to decide how much value it attaches to education, to research, to scientific assessment of options for policymakers. I mean, some of my friends here will vouch with me. You turn around to a colleague and say, oh, forget all the scientific. I am telling you, you're going to be the chief minister of Punjab. What was that based on? So, in a way, what I'm saying is, I think what Sabiha plans to do has to be done. It must be done. But I also wonder, and I want to kind of take you into that for half a minute. There was a professor at Karachi University in 1984. He was the president of the Karachi University Teachers Association, professor of philosophy. He was sitting with his students discussing the issues of the day in the light of the philosophy of the world, and he was arrested, held incommunicado for 1 year. And he was, the show cause notice was issued by the martial law authorities. This is, you know the period I'm talking about. That's a man I really think destroyed higher education in Pakistan, General Ziaul Haq. But to my way of thinking, the professor's arrest did not cause any stir in Pakistan. There were some of us, or many people, I'm sure, who were unhappy, but he was arrested. A man who's no longer alive was professor of economics at Punjab University. He went to attend, if I'm not mistaken, a trade union rally in Lahore. I'm talking about Umar Asghar Khan. He was arrested. He was fired from the Punjab University. He was a temporary lecturer at the time. He lost his job, of course. He found other things to do and became later on a well-known politician of Pakistan. But the main issue is that officials and the government as a whole, and perhaps even the society, has seen higher education and the student body, the 1 million we're talking about, as a threat to the ability of the government to get away with whatever it wants to do. Professors as the people who can inform students about what is right and what is wrong, or at least get them to ask questions of why things are being done in a certain way. And God bless the young of the whole world, because they keep raising new questions about the way their parents and grandparents have done business. So in Pakistan today, the background of what Sabiha is talking about and plans to do is that there is yet to be one recognition of the importance of quality education, not higher, quality education. One of my friends likes to point out to me all the time, there is a plagiarism pandemic in Pakistan. This wonderful PhD that we're talking about, you might want to look at who has written what to get the PhD. So, and no criticism of the person. I bless the guy who gets his PhD and gets that wonderful extra money that is promised. But God knows he had no interest in the PhD. And before that, so somewhere we lost track of some of the issues that higher education is all about, which is asking tough questions, seeking honest answers, being an example for those who would like to do what certain presidents in the United States have done recently, which we might be permitted to object to, raise questions about, discuss. That's not a tradition we've been able to build in Pakistan. So higher education is living not in an atmosphere in which Sabiha's research and contributions are going to be valued because they have some intrinsic, honest response to the needs of higher education, but who she is, what are her connections. That's what's going to work. I'm yet, well, I shouldn't say, there are many exceptions to what I'm saying, and I won't get into that. There's so much. I want to conclude with a very short story that might interest you. A few years ago, before I retired, I was at the university in Lahore, and one of my students had taken the civil service examination. And he had come from a very modest background in the walled city of Lahore, which some of you may be familiar with. And his father used to have this little fruit stall, and this young man passed the civil service examination and became a civil servant. And he invited me to attend the wedding. And when I arrived at this fancy hotel, he was marrying someone fairly important, someone's daughter who, I guess, had a longer background in the civil service. And his very plain, ordinary parents and family were seated in a section separate from the rest of the entourage of the wedding, simply because they didn't use the English language. They weren't quite familiar with how these fancy hotels like people to eat. And this, when I asked him what was the problem here, he gave an answer which I think is the problem that Sabiha and all of us face when we try to reform education. He said, I believe that I am working to create a future for myself which challenges the identity that I had as I was growing up in the walled city. I want to be part of that other community, the elite. And the real situation in Pakistan today is that higher education is doing very well. There's plenty of professional development. Sabiha's own brother has a fantastic school of economics in Lahore. The faculty is superb. The students are great. You really have to come to the simple conclusion that the great majority of the people of Pakistan were not supposed to get the goodies that we'd like them to have. Those who were supposed to get it have got it. And really Pakistan's doing very well, except that those people who didn't get an opportunity are now finding different ways to punish us for not looking after their higher education. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting commentary. We're now going to hear from Parag Khanna, who is the director of the Global Governance Initiative and a senior research fellow in the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation. He's had a lot of various previous posts. He was a senior geopolitical advisor to U.S. Special Forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was a global governance fellow at the Brookings Institution. He's held posts at the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Economic Forum, the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi, among others. And he's the author of The Second World, Empires and Influence in the New Global Order, published in 2008.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I want to thank also the Woodrow Wilson Center and Sabiha for inviting me here today, and certainly to acknowledge all of the dignitaries and experts and scholars in the room as well. It's a great pleasure to be among you. And also, of course, the India-Pakistan-U.S. friendship nature of this panel should not be ignored. I think it speaks to the universality of the topic. I want to speak about the paper and the research project, but also make some broader macro comments and have a discussion about the relationship between education, governance, the economy, and development based on some research that I've been conducting on public-private partnerships and their role in public goods areas, and how that relates to foreign policy priorities and those of the multilateral community. Sabiha didn't use the term lost generation, but it's a term that does get used quite a bit with respect to Pakistan today. You have development experts who talk about the lost generation of children in Pakistan who are not benefiting from the goal of universal primary secular education, instead studying in the various madrasas all over Pakistan. And there's a lot of controversy around that claim and the numbers surrounding it, but it is the term lost generation is used in that context. Then you have military experts who talk about the lost generation of Pakistani military officers who did not have contact with their American counterparts over the last decade, and the potential consequences of that for cooperation between the two militaries today. Again, a lot of confusion about the numbers there, and it's unclear what the impact is, but it is another usage of the term lost generation. I think there's very uncontroversial usage of the term lost generation that we could apply to describe to Sabiha's research. This lost generation that have not benefited from higher education over the last decade and beyond in Pakistan, both teachers and students. And I think that Sabiha's paper and research does a very good job of speaking both to the situation among teachers and students. She does note the successes of the HEC, enhancing student enrollment and providing incentives for grants and research. But there is a lag in both cases, as she points out, between the 2002 creation and boosting funding for HEC and the slow progress that was made then. And that is a warning to us about the likely lag in what will happen now as investment increases for HEC now and moving forward. Again, potential for this lost generation to expand. Of course, the numbers are very unclear, not just in Pakistan, but in many places in the world. And this has to do with another trend that she points to, and which I would be grateful to see more elaboration on by other researchers in the field, which is the gap between the growth in private education, and so he points to the statistics there, 1/3 or more of primary, secondary, and so forth education emerging now from the private sector, the gap between that and testing, and the results of that trend. And this is a secular trend around the world, really, particularly in the developing world, in Africa, in India, and elsewhere, the rise of private education. But the linkage between that and testing, standards, and so forth from national education authorities is vast and needs to be spoken to. Sabiha actually calls for the private sector to support the HEC in its reforms, in its policies, in its funding, and so forth. Again, there's very little evidence that that has taken place, and that is, again, a very widespread problem around the world. Now, she focuses a lot on the nuts and bolts, the very important steps that need to be taken to fix the higher educational system within its present sort of structure, policies and funding. But what interests me most is the final section of her paper, which some of you may have seen, some of you may have not, but where she really embeds this discussion in a question about global shifts in the demands of economic competitiveness today. I want to quote from her paper. The rate of unemployed graduates, despite massive funds devoted to higher education, has been on the rise. A skilled workforce is a key determinant of the investment climate. Despite positive movements on the macroeconomic front, the employment situation in Pakistan is not yet improved due to several reasons, including a serious mismatch between the jobs demanded by the emerging needs of the country and the supply of skills and trained manpower in the country, by churning out graduates ill-suited for the requirements of Pakistan. And Hamid spoke to the great majority of the people, and that is exactly what Sabiha is saying in that section of her paper about the economy. You also mentioned, Sabiha, how do you plan ahead in a fast-moving global economy where every country is forced to adapt quickly and find its niche in the global marketplace? How do you plan ahead 7 years for PhDs and determine what skills they need to have and what skills they need to teach? If some of this sounds familiar to you, it should, because this is a problem that advanced industrial economies also seem to be facing today, not least here in the United States, where we speak constantly about a crisis, really, of employment and the mismatch between the educational system. The Gates Foundation, together with Scholastic America, did a survey recently showing that only 10% of teachers feel that their students are ready for college at all. They feel that they don't have enough practical life skills. And they need those practical life skills more than they need textbooks. This is a problem of teachers not feeling empowered, teachers not being given the right material, teachers also not being treated as if they are important, as Hamid pointed out. But today, the language, the political language in the United States and increasingly in developing countries where we're finding a successful turnaround to this dire situation, one speaks about worker retraining, vocational education, skill-based certificate programs, such as in healthcare and other areas. This is the language now that links education policy at all levels to the demands of the economy. Now, I think the proposals for faculty development, for professional development of teachers is extremely important to reversing the brain drain as much as anything else, and I think Sabiha was very right to point to that. So there's a training strategy that she has laid out for teachers, but what about for the other sectors? What options do developing countries really have when they cannot afford a pristine higher educational system devoted to all the different disciplines, arts and sciences, but when the sole focus almost needs to be training people for the kinds of jobs they may potentially occupy based on Pakistan's industrial potential in the economy? So now we're talking about things like cement industries, textiles, shipbuilding, electricity and power generation, construction, port management, public administration, agriculture. These are the skills, these are the jobs that apply not only in Pakistan but in many, many parts of the world. Where is the educational system? And it requires a broadening of the understanding of what we mean by higher education and educational system to fill that niche so that Pakistan can actually develop. And that's why this is a gap. This is not a lost generation, a lost cause, a lost focus, a lost sector, in a way, of education, is bridging this gap between the educational system and the economic demands and priorities of the country. But perhaps, as I think Sabiha is saying, only the existing infrastructure right now is capable of handling that task. Now, there was some mention of American universities moving into the Middle East, into India, into China. That's been a very positive, well-received trend in all of the markets where it has taken place. But I think Sabiha is very right. That is not a panacea. There is no substitute for the national system. You'll find this across India, you'll find this in the Middle East, because the common problem is, of course, the demographic one. There is no way in which the piecemeal efforts, as generous and as innovative as they may be, are going to fill the gaps because, of course, the number of students may have grown since 1947, but the population, of course, has increased as well. Again, this is a universal problem across developing countries. I'll close with just one brief comment about the Obama administration, because Sabiha's paper alludes to the $1.5 billion in non-military assistance that the United States is pledging to Pakistan every year moving forward. Now, We've heard a lot about what USAID has done in terms of investment in higher education. We know that they are looking to some extent at small and medium-sized enterprises in Pakistan and supporting economic growth and employment through that. But where they can make a contribution is to filling this gap in the sort of technical skills for education that the bulk of the population needs. And it's not just USAID, of course, because we know that the financial demands of such a program would be far greater than what USAID has to offer. So it also requires that other institutions, right here in Washington as well, such as OPIC and MIGA, the World Bank, the IFC, so members of the international community, as well as other arms of the U.S. government, not least also what can be done and contributed by European donors and others, those need to be thought about much more seriously, and far more resources need to be put on the table from those institutions in order to fill that gap as well and try to close this lost generation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Parag. Also very, very useful. Why don't we open up the floor to all of you now? We've got some time. We're going to have a microphone going around, so after I call on you, please wait for the microphone to arrive, and then I ask that you identify yourself and keep your question singular, brief. So start over there, right by the wall.
Thank you. I'm Dana Marshall with Dewey and LaBeouf, and I do have one question, but maybe for two of the speakers, or all three actually. Just to drill down a little bit on this question of the most effective use of the Kerry Lugar Berman money. I mean, yes, $1.5 billion is a huge amount of money, but when you consider that it has to be spread over all the sectors that are needed, it actually turns out not to be a lot of money if you look at it that way. What do you think the most effective way that can be used? Let's say the two or three lowest hanging fruit items in the area of education for projects to be funded, let's say over these 5 years that this program is supposed to extend.
I can just continue what I was saying earlier about that in terms of focusing it on education is certainly one of the priorities, and a lot can be done there. The other is, as I mentioned, something that is underway, which is investment in SMEs. And the way in which USAID is starting to, and I think it needs more encouragement in this regard, in looking more into the interior of Pakistan is absolutely crucial for this. I certainly think that infrastructure investment is absolutely vital, but the private sector can play more of a role there. And it's worth noting that Pakistan's capital markets really could support already. This has nothing to do really with the Kerry Lugar legislation. Really can support a great deal more investment in infrastructure and channel that liquidity, and we don't see enough of that happening. Governance reform would be another area. Governance has been this catch-all sort of phrase, and billions of dollars have already been poured into Pakistan and other countries in the name of governance. But the problem is, of course, it hasn't really yielded results because it doesn't focus on the kind of situational local governance training and priorities, rule of law sorts of things that are far more necessary. It's been much more high level. So I do think there are, say, 6 or 7 priority areas that I would like to see the money go towards. But the key principles being focusing on the lower level and focusing more broadly within Pakistan, and focusing much more on, of course, on delivering the aid and assistance to actual Pakistani actors more so than to American entities.
Can I just add to that? I'm going to talk in the context of education, particularly higher education, because that's what my paper was about. I think that we need to recognize now that the degree colleges are the weakest link in our higher education system. A lot of attention has been given to schools. A lot of attention, as we said, has been given to universities. In fact, I should have mentioned it, that all the funding for PhDs, particularly abroad, have only been given to university faculty. The college faculty have been ignored completely in terms of development. So I think that, a proposal to strengthen the colleges, strengthening it at the provincial and district level, strengthening the indigenous programs that we're offering, particularly the local MPhil and PhD, and then supporting research. in the areas that we mentioned earlier. I think that would be very helpful.
I'd like to put in a plug for women.
Yeah.
I have found in 30, 40 years of work in Pakistan that the most outstanding students are the girls. The most outstanding teachers are the women. If you want to do something for Pakistan, invest in women's education at all levels. And I will support what Sabiha just said. She's absolutely right. I don't know how many of you have heard this before. Degree colleges is a strange term. It's only used in, at least I think of in Pakistan, simply because all institutions give degrees. But we call degree colleges those institutions that give a BA and are run by the government in all sorts of districts and faraway locations. And some of the politicians get a degree college in their village where there are 10 students, while the nearby town has no degree college. So you have all sorts of wonderful situations in which you can improve the life of the degree colleges of Pakistan. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, right in the back, woman with the green.
Hi, Rebecca Winthrop from the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. Thank you very much. It was a really great set of presentations. I have a question for you, Sabiha, based on something that Hamid talked about, which is, he talked a lot about the politics of power and how that's overlaid on the education system in Pakistan. So I'm wondering, your policy recommendations about improving the professional development of faculty, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what about the governance aspects of the higher education system, specifically how politics plays a role in that. How do you square that with your sort of recommendations?
I think it's the chicken and the egg situation, which comes first. And I think that, in my view, it's education which is the critical factor. Because if you have an educated youth force, they are going to be your future leaders, they are going to be your future faculty, they are going to be your future professionals. So today, I mean, if you don't have a mandatory professional development program for university faculty in the USA, they learn through observation. They have a good system in place. We need to change our system. To change the system means our faculty needs to be equipped with new skills. Now, talking about the politics, and I've done a lot of study during this period here about student politics and about politics in general, destabilizing educational policies and so on. I think that we need to look at grassroots level improvement. If we focus on that like we've done, whether we talk about the local government, I think we need to talk about the local communities of teachers. If we can do that, I think that will bring a revolution, a silent revolution in education development.
Okay, we'll take these two the question right here, the woman with another green shirt.
Hi, I'm Azmat Khan from the South Asia Studies Department at the Council on Foreign Relations. And I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about education in the federally administered tribal areas. I've seen some degree colleges in certain places that were specific to women and in parts of Quram agency like Parachinar, but I don't have a holistic understanding of the education system within the FATA, and if you could talk about problems specific to that area, I would be interested.
This question is addressed to me? Right, okay. Let me first of all start by talking about my childhood. I've spent many years in this area, in Peshawar. My father was posted there. I visited some of these tribal areas with my family. We used to go to Swat for weekends, do fishing for long walks. I and my sister could hold hands and go for long walks at the age of 8 or 9. And we were safe and we were secure. I've studied in the convent there myself for many years in Peshawar. Today I have friends and colleagues at the Peshawar University, in schools, teachers, others. So it's a kind of a very, very volatile situation there at the moment. You have the province running literally at the risk of security. I mean, we read only yesterday or day before yesterday of a bomb blast near the consulate. I'm also teaching, and I'm also looking after the School of Education at the Beacon House National University, and we were offered by one of these support agencies to run a teacher training programs for these tribal teachers. After months of discussion, it was postponed. It is difficult, and I think that we need to calm down the situation there. You've heard about schools burning and things like that. But again, I think that the situation is we still need to keep the effort going. Because it is only education at the end which will empower women, as has been said by some of our delegates here, and it is what will empower the people. So there is, I understand in the tribal areas, two modes of thinking. There is a small minority which are the radical thinkers. These radical thinkers don't think that women need to be educated. They don't think that anyone really needs higher education because if it's a westernized system. So they're always there to create trouble. But I also note that there is a silent majority which wants education for their children, even their daughters. I've done a study for USAID in Balochistan as well, for instance, is one of the tribal areas in the really far-flung. And we found parents, including fathers, saying, we want our daughters to study. So I think the will of the community is there. The will of the people is there. It's just that we have to, get over this thorny and this rocky ride to actually be able to reach them. It is difficult, I'll say. It's challenging.
Okay, there's been a question right here in the front, right up here. Oh, sorry about that.
Thanks. I'm Ziad Al-Haddad, the former Director of Operations at the World Bank. Sabiha, absolutely excellent, your discourse. I learnt a lot. I'm sure the others did too. And very, very, I think, insightful comments from the reviewers. Sabiha, a quick question on numbers. There was one of the questions asked at the back was how this 1.5 billion will be utilized. A while ago, I used to be the chief of mission at the Turkey office of the World Bank. There was a $10 billion education program in that country to which we contributed for a country which had about well over 95% literacy and a population of 63 million. When you talk about the new education policy and the funds being put for that, 2 billion you mentioned, which is a great improvement from what there was before. But this is for a country which has less than 50% literacy and 180 million population. So I just want to put this in perspective. Yes, I'm very encouraging that the figures are getting certainly more impressive, but against what is required, this is still a drop in the ocean. Any idea on that? That actually begs the question of priorities. And number two, what else can you get?
I totally agree with that. You see, as an educator, I feel that a good teacher who just can sit under the shade of a tree with a group of students can contribute far more than a very sophisticated university campus with high-tech auditoriums and so on and so forth. So I think that the investment must be in human resources. And that is why my focus has been to say that let's look at developing the human resources, because look at the impact. I've been a teacher for over, and I won't tell you how many years, but certainly over 35 years. And what I do know is that I must have impacted the lives of, in fact, generations in a way, a couple of generations of students. So that's talking about thousands and thousands of women and some boys or some males. So I think the impact of a faculty is enormous. It's like a ripple effect. They go, they teach not just one batch of students. For instance, in 1 year, you could be exposed, like if you're an English teacher, for instance, to something like 200 students per year whose lives that you're impacting. So I think from an economic point of view, I'm not an economist yet, so sorry I won't be able to answer your, maybe Parag can handle it better. But what I do know is that if that investment is made at the right place, which is not so much at the physical infrastructure. I've heard of millions of dollars going to building, an auditorium to hold a convocation. I think it must be invested in the faculty development itself. And that means, upgrading the faculty in modern techniques, in, techniques that can help their students to really engage in critical thinking. Our students are used to rote learning. Our assessment systems reward rote learning. We want to get rid of that old system. One of the problems that Pakistan is facing today is because we have a youth that has not been trained to think critically or to think independently. The first thing I do when I'm in class with some university students is to say, don't read the critics. Here is a piece of poem or here is a piece of text. I want your response to it. And they find it very difficult to do it initially because they've never done it. They've only learned, oh, so and so, this expert says that. It's almost prophetic. No. They've never been taught to think for themselves and to have a view or an opinion of their own. So I think this is where it would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I want to go back to the gentleman with his hand up, the blue suit. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. I'm Javed Hamid, and I'm related to Sabiha, so that's my credentials for being here. Sabiha, I have this question directed at Sabiha. First of all, I want to congratulate you on a very nice presentation and on a very important topic. And this is, I have not read the paper, and therefore you may have already addressed this, but just want to put it on the table. I would be interested in knowing if you have actually looked at what models have worked in different countries, developing countries, where it has been successful, and what were the key things that happened. And I'll give you a couple of examples why this is interesting. Obviously, India is a very interesting example where in the IT area, the whole thing the IT revolution was very closely linked with their IT institutes and people who taught there and the quality of education, etc., etc. But I have also seen something that was happening in China. And again, it was the focus on trying to raise the level of the higher education through different means. One of the means that they were using was that and I think you mentioned something about distance teaching. In Shanghai, there is a very high-class medical university. So what they did was that they set up some outposts in like rural areas and in distant smaller towns and things. And in these outposts, they were like colleges. And the people would come, they would come as regular students, they would have their faculty, but they would be a lecture that would be going on from Shanghai University, Professor so-and-so, who is demonstrating something about some medical procedure or something where he is the leading authority on it. And those students would be then being watching, and then they are being taught by the local faculty who's also watching, and then they kind of pick it up from there. So there is a learning of faculty going on, and there is a very high-class sort of imparting of knowledge that is going on through using technology that you were referring to. And second example, just little example, is that in, again, whether you looked at it or not, but again, same context, is what do other countries do to track people who have gone out and come back, and then how do they support them to continue to be leaders in higher education in the field that they have done. In Pakistan, I have observed that once there are a lot of people that go out, come back, do their PhD, but then after that nobody knows what happens to them. And there is no follow-up support to help them to continue to maintain their skill and continue to improve and then impart it to other people. So I, again, just want to know what other people are doing in these areas that might be helpful.
I think I'll start with the last bit first, which is that I didn't have the time to show all the results. But according to the 2008 report of HEC, only 62 scholars who completed their studies has been placed by the HEC. Only 62 scholars. This is after 8 years of reforms. So it's not, again, not a big number, and it's disappointing. But I think the other question that you're talking about is far more important in the context of my study, which is, did we look at theoretical frameworks? Yes, we have. We spent a long time looking at it. And what we discovered was that though we had many lessons to learn in terms of principles, actually in practice, the model that I'm proposing, I think, would be a new model. Because the traditional model, even in the US, is that you have a school of education that offers doctoral or B.Ed degrees for teacher educators. And then you have your professional development courses, which are run by each university, where faculty come as per need and attend a course. I'm talking about a model where professional development is integrated into the higher studies model, looking at the psyche of our faculty today. The reward systems reward the higher studies program. So everybody, and if you said, well, why do we need a PhD for the university scholars? I think that's a given that at some stage you do need it for specialization. So by building into the system or integrating into the system the PD strand means that at the same time the faculty is actually being imparted with all the new and modern skills and methodology. The second thing about research, which Hamid also talked about, is that so many people do PhD and they just did it for the sake of PhD. In the model, I've also explained about the research thesis. What I'm talking about is that at the MPhil level, which is for the majority of the undergraduate teachers, you actually have action research. This action research model is one in which the research findings actually inform teaching practice. It's much more immediate, and that's what we need. We need that small action research within the classroom, within the institution, within the community of institutions, which actually impact their own teaching practice and address the problems that are there. At the PhD level, I'm proposing that all that you need are a number of articles. I think this is a tradition that the US has set. The UK now is following it as well. We don't need 120,000 word thesis. We need it for a few specialized areas, yes, where we want to make breakthroughs, we want to break barriers in science and technologies, where we want to have specialists who are dealing with a microorganism or who's dealing with something else, but certainly not for all the faculty. For the majority of the faculty, they are not all research scholars. They are teaching practitioners, they're classroom practitioners. What they would do well is that in a period of 3 to 5 years, they actually produce 3 articles. 3 articles which are related to one another, which have a framework, but which can be done in the area of interest and it could be done under different supervisors. So I think that I'm looking at a much more pragmatic approach which will work and in which we can do with less expertise than should it be currently available.
Bryce, right behind you, a woman had her hand up, right behind you.
Thank you. Sabira Qureshi, independent consultant. The nature of the subject and the issues that have been raised could trigger 100 questions, but being mindful of Michael's strict instructions, I'm going to limit myself to one. Sabiha, I just wondered, and I think this takes on from Javed Hamid's question in a broader sense. You mentioned 1 million students in universities today. I wonder if you could tell us how many of these are enrolled in the Allama Iqbal Open University. And I was just wondering that given the huge issue that has been raised about access and particularly the sharp divides and the education system that is perpetuating those divides in Pakistan, whether we can do anything to strengthen the distance learning situation in Pakistan, given that the largest majority of students in Pakistan are still getting their education through distance learning. If you could just touch upon.
Sabra, you are well informed. I know you've been through the economic survey and the HEC report. There are so many contradictions. It's unbelievable. The HEC talks about these 749,000 students that are enrolled. The economic survey 2009 lists them separately. 749,000 for universities and 346,000 for the colleges. And I and Amna, my research intern, have been scratching our heads to say, is it only 749,000 or is it this plus this? And we haven't got an answer so far. That's why we've been citing this 1 million. It could just well be 749,000. But coming back to your question about distance learning, a large majority, almost half of those, 40% of those are distance learning students. And this distance learning programs are run by Allama Iqbal Open University. I've been a tutor there, and in my early days, I've been an examiner there. I'm on the board of studies. The quality is much to be asked for. It's really, really pathetic, the quality of these distance learning programs. We have a virtual university with Naveed Malik in place as the Vice Chancellor. They're making an effort. It's based in Lahore. But I would say, and I know we need technology. I know we need help through these online access programs. And Dr. Javed Ahmad has also talked about it. But I would like to caution, I would like to say, let's strengthen our classroom programs first. Let's have a kind of a split program where you have direct interaction between the teacher and the students, and at the same time you can supplement it with these excellent lectures by experts. So I think that this distance learning program has not brought credit to Pakistan or to education, and a lot needs to be done. And I agree that one of the prongs in terms of aid could be to strengthen the distance learning programs, and there's a lot of effort that can be done there. Yes.
Well, we've got time for 2 quick questions. So I'm going to recognize this gentleman right here who had his hand up for a while, and then the gentleman right here. I apologize that we don't have more time. Right there. Yeah.
Hi. Excellent presentation. My name is Zahid Ibrahim. I'm a Pakistani lawyer. I also teach at a law school in Karachi, where the average age of faculty, average salary is about $85 a month. My question to you is, can you speak a little about the debate in Pakistan in terms of what should be the medium of instruction? Because that seems to be a very elementary question which we don't ever seem to have resolved. Thank you.
I'm so glad you asked this question because I should have addressed it earlier, didn't have the time. But first of all, to talk about salaries of teachers, I think that's a part that I should have mentioned despite the time constraint. It's pathetic. It's really low. And I totally agree with you that we need to boost up the status of the teacher and the faculty in Pakistan. They enjoy, particularly the public sector, no social status. I've had a certificate distribution ceremony of college teachers who attended our short courses in the Beacon House National University. The Director of Education came and awarded the certificates. And when he addressed the students, which were about 100 teachers that we had trained, he was so patronizing, and he spoke down to them, and he really insulted them. And I felt, we've done so much in these last few weeks to build up their confidence, to make them feel that they have an important role to play in changing the teaching community and society. And what is this? And I realized then that it's the bureaucrats. In fact, I haven't had time to talk about the interviews. The interviews are telling us all the time that there's irregularity, there is inefficiency, and courses are being offered one-off. It's all by the bureaucrats sitting in the directorates, sitting in the ministry. In fact, I should have read a little letter to you. I didn't have the time. I brought it along. I think it's on my mobile. This is by a principal of a federal government college in Islamabad. She writes to me and says, Dear Dr. Sabiha Mansoor, I got your question on faculty development practice. Thank you very much. I just want to say I haven't filled it in because we, the principal and the faculty, have nothing to do with the faculty development programs. They are offered by the Ministry of Education whenever they want to. We are never consulted. And so I'm extremely sorry not to be able to fill up this form. And that was returned. So just shows, the strict barrier between the actual needs of the college and the faculty and those who are delivering them. The second about language planning, that's a huge question. Remember, don't forget my PhD was in language planning in higher education in Pakistan. There's a book that I've written about, published by Oxford University Press, called Language Planning in Higher Education, a case study of Pakistan. But basically what I've pleaded is that there should be English for all. And what we need to focus on is the mother tongue, the regional languages at the primary and even the higher level to give them a boost. Urdu is there. It's a linked language. It's a national language. We all understand and appreciate it. But for higher education, we need the materials. Very little progress has been done. So let's not again have a de facto English-Urdu medium, even in higher education, though the Constitution and even the policy says it should be English medium. But for all purposes, it's Urdu medium in the colleges, public sector colleges. So my response to that is that for the first phase, certainly till we develop, materials in Urdu, regional languages, let's focus on English medium.
Thank you very much. Sabiha, congratulations on an excellent presentation. My name is Awais Sadat. Since I'm a senior citizen, I'm going to ask 2 questions. The first one is to the panel here, Parag and Hamid, and that's about the economic development imperative. Is it more immediate at the basic education level, or is it at the higher education? I mean, is it more important if there's a choice between higher education and basic education for our people, given the dropout rate and the illiteracy and others? Should we be focusing on that? And Sabiha, to you, how do you change the incentive system? I think Hamid had talked about that. I saw your presentation. I think your recommendations are extremely sound, and the MPhil as a stepping stone to a PhD is an excellent idea. But how do you change the incentive system where, I mean, obviously there is a reward for having a PhD. You get 300 rupees or 400 rupees extra before more? Okay. In my days, when I was in university with you, Hamid, was that. How do you change that incentive, and is the government willing to recognize that? Because obviously the policy has to, the lever of change has to be there. So that's the question. Thank you.
Can I address it first, because it's in continuation with the rest of the discussion, then you can all take on the other. Again, it was part of my study, no time to discuss it, but it's a very, very important question. When I'm talking about the portable faculty portfolio, the credit portfolio, it actually means that if you attend a course, it goes into your portfolio. There are immediate rewards. You don't have to wait till the end of your PhD to get a couple of thousand rupees as your increment. For every step of your faculty development, there is an inbuilt incentive and reward system, so which encourages the faculty to continue it and make it into a lifelong process. So it is really the credit, the portable credit portfolio that will help you. The incentives would be even for the professional development courses and not only linked to the PhD.
I'll just say quickly on your question, I think it would be a false choice between investing only in primary education versus in higher education. It's more about the needs. What an economy needs is employers and employees. So you need both of those demographic strata to be covered. It's really about the sectoral specificity and investment in that. So if you look at an IIT school in India, they're not famous for producing poets, but you're producing people who start firms in technology and computer science areas and using engineering in math and science, and then the graduates who will go and work for them. Why is it that Germany was the world's largest exporter until this year when China took over? For decades. Why a country of 80 million people? Their educational system is very segmented. Students are selected and veered in different directions. They have high-cost, high-wage factories as well. How come they haven't experienced the kind of hollowing out that the United States and other places have had? Their educational system is rigorously focused on producing both employers and employees.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up. I like to think that we do a lot of good work here. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. But please join me in a round of applause for the speakers and comments.